Just to wake you up a little bit, I'm going to play you something that this drone captured in the Faroe Islands, just to get us started. Welcome. I started flying drones because I wanted freaking cool video like that. And it took me years and years to learn how to maneuver it properly. Fast forward several years, and now I'm messing around with Microsoft Flight Simulator and much bigger things than drones. But what does that mean for development? And what are we even doing in this? I'm Heather Downing, and I'm a total drone nerd. Please geek out with me the rest of this conference about them. I'd love to show you more. What we're going to talk about today, though, is some of the more sticky situations when it comes to privacy and what we should look at when it comes to data. What is possible, though, because we are taking this concern seriously in the drone community, and then all the really cool things that are coming out. So if you stick with me, I'll start first with explaining a little bit, not too much, about the current regulations in different countries, and then we'll go into why we would even want to track a drone in the first place, and then what else is coming. Sound good? Great. It has been a pretty rapid rise since drones were allowed to take flight. The first agricultural drone was approved in the United States in 2011, and that is significant because it is one of the largest verticals that uses drones today. Of course, over 10 years ago, Amazon declared that they were going to do delivery, but we all know that it took them a little bit longer than a year or two to get that accomplished. So this is where more practical applications of drones started taking off. Because they were allowed to, there were plenty of drones used, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, for search and rescue operations. Because number one, it's certainly cheaper. Number two, it's definitely greener to do that. And number three, at a moment's notice, you can pull a drone out of a box that's in a number of state parks, national parks, et cetera, to try to find lost hikers. In 2017, that's when the 1 million drone registry hit, and from what I understand, a much smaller number of drones are registered than actually exist in our country, so keep that in mind. In 2019, Wing was the very first company that was approved to launch commercial drone delivery services ahead of Amazon. Just last year, we had something called RemoteID rules taking effect into the US, but they were delayed because we didn't have all of the manufacturers together to make sure that it got integrated properly. In October, in the US, they approved Zipline to fly beyond line of sight, beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS. And then in November, in the UK, the CAA opened a request for consultation to the drone community to give them commentary on what they think about the RemoteID integration going forward, which of course ended this month. Now, in 2024, RemoteID will be active in both the US and in the EU, and the UK will follow shortly after as soon as everything is approved. So why am I telling you all this boring stuff? And who the heck am I anyway to talk to you about it? Number one, I do not work for a regulator. Number two, I do not work for a drone manufacturer. I am just a programmer who flies drones and has for a while, and I get asked these questions a lot. So I'm gonna dig a little bit deep if that's okay. Believe it or not, what I just did with my drone is not the main use of flights today. Yes, absolutely, photography and video does get used, but in terms of frequency, the most frequent use of drones are inspections, regardless of where you are in the world. Mapping is another really big one, to do land surveying, especially right before sales. So the real estate companies have known this for a long time. Believe it or not, delivery drones are the next most used in terms of amount of drones in the sky at once. And since beyond visual line of sight had been approved, at least in the States, and of course it will come for other countries thereafter, you're gonna see a lot more of them than you are your recreational drone. Photography drones probably takes like the fourth spot. I would probably put them together along with the film industry, also uses drones quite a bit. And the most fun category is racing drones. They're kind of unique because they're done completely in an immersed environment with basically a helmet on and a spotter. And it spots what you're doing, but you basically are inside like the drone as it flies. So there are different considerations as to where they can be done. Right now, a lot of the racing drones competitions are done inside, or they're done at specially designated green spaces or parks that are given a waiver by the regulatory body to commence. Because they go low and high and all through like park benches, and they're very small, they have a little bit different footprint than these larger drones that we're talking about today. In the UK, you have a very different approach to drones than where I live in the States. And this became really important because I love traveling the world. So imagine taking one drone that you bought in whatever country and trying to figure out whether or not you can actually fly it there. It comes down not just from the top regulatory body, it also comes down to where you're launching from. Perhaps you would not be surprised to learn that I'm not allowed to launch this drone anywhere near Parliament, which is right over there. So I'm not gonna be flying this one today for lots of safety reasons. But when I say flying, really, it's the airspace above that is governed by your aviation regulatory bodies. But the ground that you launch from and land on can be governed by other entities like your city or your county or even your local police. So keeping that in mind, I just kind of want to give you an idea when we're talking about remote ID and who it's going to affect specifically here in the UK. When you look at these different categories, the open one at the very bottom presents the lowest risk, right, to third parties. So an authorization from the Civil Aviation Authority is not required. So most of these people are going to be hobbyists, recreational flyers, but certain commercial pilots if they're just playing around. In the specific category, you have more complex operations or aspects of the operation that fall outside the boundaries of the open category. So like if you're going beyond visual line of sight, which is pretty easy to do in downtown London, let me tell you, there's so many things in the way. Besides having to deal with the signal strength being an issue, understanding the special checklists you need to do to make sure that you're not going to accidentally hit somebody, something that is up high, and that what happens when your drone breaks that connection, what does it do? Are you aware of what that is? Like, can it return, what does it mean to return to home? And does that mean it's just gonna fly through a building to get to you, or will it go up to a certain height and then come down? Is that height enough to get over that tree, that object, that person? And will it go through something illegal? That requires a little bit more training. And for that, you have to complete something called the DMARES, or I think it's DMARES. Online, it just is a tutorial that gives you a flyer ID, and then you can obtain an A2 certificate from there. But in the highest risk category, you need to do more than that. You also have to get an actual license to fly, but getting that DMARES exam. And that's usually done for very complex operations where you have to get very close to other buildings you're not usually authorized to be in so that you understand, one, what is the effects of wind, can you read charts, stuff like that. So you see, the recreational flyer doesn't need to do a lot of that. They just have to understand where they're allowed to fly. The current state of drones is very popular, but it isn't just popular with your neighbor next door who bought one for their kid for Christmas. It's much more popular because there's a lot of land in the world, and there's just operations over the sea as well, that it doesn't make it very practical for a human to go and do something right there in person. And so this has become very popular to solve lots of problems. And we're gonna go into a little bit of that today. So the reason I bring up RemoteID is because it is the Wild West, or has been for at least a decade for drones when it comes to these guys. And lots of people like it that way just fine. The only problem is, for all of the wonderful pilots out there, there's always gonna be somebody messing up, and sometimes doing it on purpose. It becomes important when we talk about shared airspace. And I'll give this example. I'm sure some of you have heard of a bird strike before on an aircraft. Yes? Well, that is a little bit different. There's a little bit more malleable. This is less malleable than a bird. But also, the larger the drone gets, the more risk it poses to other aircraft. And in the skies right now, manned aircraft with people in it get the right of way. So you are at the bottom of the pecking order as a drone operator. But I bet you, if you were 16 and you got this, you're probably not thinking about what it would be like to get accidentally tangled up with a Cessna. You know, you're just thinking, I just want to fly over Heathrow. What's the big deal? So because of this, sometimes it's important to understand if people are just making a mistake as a new hobbyist, or if they are a repeat offender and somebody that is very intentionally trying to cause trouble. The way you do that is kind of by identifying the drone itself. Right now, you can't tell, well, at least up until this year, you couldn't tell where the drone was coming from, who owned it, was it even supposed to be there? RemoteID, the concept, is that it will kind of be squawking its own identification and location, and its operator's information as well, so that law enforcement, presumably, can find out where that operator is if they stray outside of a known approved airspace. And you think, this is not that big of a deal. Like, it seems like we don't have tracking devices on our cars, right? So why would I need to do that on my drone? Well, because of the frequent use of people doing illicit things, unfortunately, like dropping payloads into prisons with these guys, they kind of want to know who's obeying the law. And I am not really on the side of law enforcement, but I am on the side of other pilots who are flying in airplanes and who want to make sure that they don't get hit by a drone. And to think that this doesn't happen is very silly. It's happened in almost every major country where pilots just had to take evasive actions to fly around a drone. And you're like, it's so much bigger than this guy. But at those speeds, it will absolutely cause damages, and recently even damaged a helicopter as well that did land safely but needed major work done to it. So I'd rather like to continue flying my drone and not be told I can never fly it, right? RemoteID is supposed to help us with that. That means it will be attached to you in a, yes, I'm allowed to fly this drone, don't worry, I'm not causing trouble kind of way. This is a good thing. And let me tell you, it's hard for me to say this. Because whenever we have more information, privacy is an issue, right? Especially when you just have a device that is squawking a bunch of that data. So let's talk about that. The definition of RemoteID, it provides real-time identification and tracking of the drone during flight through different broadcast modules or network connections, and it is different depending on which country you're in. So they broadcast tracking data directly from the aircraft via some sort of frequency, okay? It also can be done over Wi-Fi. So the message elements are a lot like a JSON payload, right? It just says, here I am, This is where my location is. Here's how fast I'm going. This is my current altitude. And here's where the operator's latitude and longitude is, okay? It also enhances a little bit of safety because that means that if the ID is known, and let's say you are having the World Cup here, and BBC wants to fly a drone over the stadium to get a really cool shot like they do. That means that they're allowed to be there because they applied for the right permits, etc., right? Well, that's fine, but you don't want a random one flying in and then hitting one of the players or the crowd, right? You want one that is known to be there. This is how it can be quickly identified as an allowed drone in that airspace. And this is much more traceable, like to the operator, and so it's easier to get people to comply with it. Kind of looks like this nice little drawing here that I did not do, but I got it just for you. So basically, you can use an app to see any drones around you. There are several out there already, and they specifically use RemoteID broadcasts in order to show you that. Can you see a little bit of a concern at this point? You can see where the drone is, but what else can you see? Where the operator is. Now, that may not seem like such a big deal if you're right there with it, but let's say the drone operator is your 14-year-old daughter, and you'd rather not have people trying to find out where she is, right? So this is like the biggest issue that we have with this. And I spent 4 years in the identity space, so I'm very sensitive about privacy. The good news is each regulatory body is considering a different approach to this. The payload is what it is from the manufacturer. They put it out there, but the regulators can say, we only really want this part of the payload, right? We only want to know where the drone is. Or we only want law enforcement to see where you are. We don't really care about anybody else seeing it. But at this point, it's just public information. It just squawks it as it flies, right? I mean, I could see this like about 1.5 miles away. That's crazy, just this little guy. So it's going to be even farther depending on the manufacturer. If you want to know a little bit more about how this works, you can go to droneremoteid.com and check it out. It was originally authored in the US, but now it's being adopted worldwide. So because it has remote ID, then you can do that drone surveillance and make sure that it's an actually approved drone to see. Air traffic control, this is a really big one. Air traffic control has to kind of keep monitoring what the different aircraft in their airspace is doing, and this is an aircraft, it's just a very small one. So wouldn't it be good for them to know whether or not there is a drone entering the runway area so that they can at least tell another pilot to go around or to avoid it? It's just better for safety. Of course, drone delivery packages are possible because they can be geo-zoned and say, all right, these are allowed to deliver these packages to this area for this reason, and don't worry, it's authorized. And if you were somebody who was a little nervous about why is there a drone flying around, you could see that it was an authorized drone. Wildlife monitoring is really huge. So now it just takes so much more time for a human to get in a helicopter that is even louder than a drone and go to check out the population of the buffalo, right? This is so much easier for them to do, but they only want authorized drones to do that in a park. And of course, bridge inspections are interesting. Specifically around the Sydney Harbour Bridge, there are different flight zones that are very, very close to the water. And they say nobody can fly over the water because there's all of these ships coming in and out of Sydney Harbour of various heights, and we just don't know. So for the bridge inspectors, how do they know that the drone flying around is allowed to be there? How do they know? Remote ID is one of the ways they want to know. And of course, search and rescue means that they can also track which drone went where, when did they lose signal with that drone on a big map. Before, they would have no idea. They would just go and then maybe it ran out of battery, Maybe it hit a fire, we don't know. This way it allows it to be tracked a lot more easier than just the operator being able to see where it went. So you get enhanced situational awareness and prevention of those mid-air collisions. Hopefully it helps incident responses go a little bit quicker, and it allows you to coexist with other planes in the area. So specifically in the US and in the EU, if you have a lightweight drone like this guy, you're not required to have remote ID. But fun fact, this drone manufacturer put it on there anyway, so you can't turn it off. If you have an older drone that is small, that just means you don't have to buy a module to put on it so that it squawks like that.
Not too long ago, flying drones and other unmanned aircraft seemed like something out of science fiction. But now, the future has arrived, and the number of drones, or unmanned aircraft systems, is steadily increasing each year. The FAA is committed to fully integrating UAS into our national airspace system. Remote identification of drones is a crucial component of these integration efforts. In short, remote ID is the ability of drones in flight to provide identification and location information that can be received by other parties. See how remote ID is helping to pave the way of the future and welcome the benefits these new entrants can bring. Due to advances in technology, more and more unmanned aircraft systems are taking to the skies, proving beneficial for aerial imaging, inspection, delivery, and other capabilities. Moving forward, we want to be certain these unmanned aircraft are flying safely and within areas they are allowed to operate. Remote ID will provide information about drones while in flight, allowing authorized individuals to ensure the safety of our skies. And it lays the foundation needed to welcome more complex drone operations in the future. Here's how it works. In its most basic form, remote ID can be described as a digital license plate for UAS. To comply with remote ID requirements, a UAS must broadcast message elements from takeoff to shutdown, such as the unique ID number, location, and altitude of the drone, and its control station or takeoff location. If it appears to be flying in an unsafe manner or in an area they are not allowed to operate, authorized individuals from public safety organizations may request more information about the drone from the FAA. Remote ID is a publicly available broadcast from a UAS that can be received through applications for concerned members of the general public. Those authorized to request additional information may include aviation safety inspectors, law enforcement, and air traffic security specialists.
That gets long. So I'm just going to go into the important concepts here. Is that there's two different types of broadcasts you can do with this guy. You can go with network ID, any sort of, just like your phone, or you could do a very large Wi-Fi broadcast. It also kind of uses cellular network specifically in the EU. And the UK is still to determine how they'd like to do it, but I understand that there might be even a third option here. Of course, the challenge is you have to make sure that this can transmit long enough to actually catch somebody. And the questions I get all the time is, can you hack this? What do you think the answer is? Yeah. Of course you can. But you're never going to stop a bad actor. You're just going to be able to make the skies a little bit safer. So unfortunately, it's not going to fix all the problems, but it will at least identify who is allowed to be there. When you think about it, it's more about that allow list than that deny list. So let's say you have an old drone, right? What do you do with that? Like, what if it doesn't have remote ID already? There are several other modules out there. QPilot is the probably most prevalent one right now. And there's some even less expensive options that you can put on there so that you're allowed to fly. This only really matters if you're ever stopped by an authoritative figure and they ask you, hey, do you have remote ID? Are you turned on? Do you know about this? They'll almost always just give you a warning unless, again, you're a repeat offender. So they do have these. If you have a very expensive drone that you'd rather not have to repurchase that automatically has it installed. If you're interested in the payload, because I know I was, this is kind of what it looks like, at least the big open one. So it just kind of shows you what kind of connection type it has, latitude, longitude, the speed, and this would broadcast at whatever interval the regulatory body demanded at minimum. So it could be very fast, it could be a lot of data, it could be a little bit of data. If I was a drone manufacturer, I would like to give the least amount of frequency possible to preserve the battery, right? Because I don't want it to just constantly be squawking too much, but there's going to be a statute of limitations there. And of course, if you notice at the bottom, it shows system/operator, and it shows the lat and long. That would be the pilot, that's the drone pilot. So drone scanner is an open source project. You can look at it on GitHub if you're interested in how to look at this on Android and iOS, specifically for what all drones should be broadcasting. But what's interesting is that not all drone scanning apps will show the pilot location. By choice, Kitty Hawk decided not to do that. They opted to not, and they don't have to. As long as the drone itself is squawking it, they don't have to show it in their app. And I suspect this will be something that the UK might take into consideration as well. Because again, the regulatory body can decide how much of that information they need. All right, I think I talked about that. In terms of regulatory landscape, we've got FAA, ESA, and the CAA. So this was the biggest one for me, is the privacy concern. I personally don't really want people to see my location. However, at the moment you can, unless there is a specific mandate to suppress that information from your regulatory body, the drone manufacturers don't have to suppress it. Of course, there's a lot of technical complexity. If you try and build a drone scanner app yourself, which I have also done, there's a lot to consider. Sometimes it doesn't work depending on which drone it is. Sometimes if there's a lot of buildings nearby, interference, it's actually difficult to get that signal. So it's not foolproof. And again, it's very confusing when I travel here. I had to look up, again, in specific detail, what can I do in London? Can I fly in London? Am I allowed? And go from there. It's difficult to feel like, well, in this one country, you totally are within the law, and then you go to somewhere else and you're suddenly not. And it can differ right down to the city as well. But remember, if people don't want to comply, they won't. And how much are they really going to be able to enforce? Really, they're only going to probably enforce people who are extremely bad actors. If they go up to 15,000 feet, 1,500 feet, they're probably not supposed to be there. That's definitely general aviation airspace. So they're probably going to go after you if they notice you way up there. If you just accidentally fly like too close to a building or a tree, you might just get a warning. But in general, the purpose of this is to not make this not sound like fun. It's just to be safer. Because if this was already in place and they know the people that have taken the test to do this, you're much more likely to have a stress-free experience in this hobby. Oh dear, I lost that.
The security angle. I mean, remote ID as a concept is very much originally centered on that safety and security angle in terms of protection of critical infrastructure, that primacy with whatever happened with remote ID. Okay. The public don't need to know where a pilot is necessarily for any of that. And things like potential UTM use cases and potential risk mitigations are positive benefits that come out from it. So I'm looking forward to those, but I don't believe those will be the primacy, and they won't be the real reason that we integrate remote.
Fantastic, thank you. That's actually, for how remote ID is still in its infancy here in the UK, that's a really great answer, so thank you. It's good to just feel how that happens. And as I've often said to people, with the CAA here in the UK, if you guys know something, you will tell us, or if you have an opinion on something, you're quite open with that information.
I don't know if you caught that, but just in case, basically the CAA is saying, this is just last month, was saying, yes, we want to do remote ID. No, we don't really feel like pilot location is necessary, but they have not yet decided. So they just finished the request for comment on this on January 10th of this year. So you're going to hear more things this year, but the point is that it's coming anyway. It's just how much of it is coming for the UK that you have to keep in mind. If you're interested to read more about that, they have a drone-specific page just from the CAA, and I will never send you to a site that is not official because it changes so quickly in this industry, and it has to. This is really the only true authority on it. Okay, so let's talk about future fun stuff. Now that we know about all that, what are people doing with drones right now? Has anybody heard about the autonomous air taxis yet? No? Yes? A couple of you. I think it's pretty cool. I don't know if I'd be the first one to try it out, but I think it's pretty cool. Of course, by 2030, I think the majority of the last mile stuff will probably be delivered this way, supplemented by some of the electric vans. And of course, drone swarms with like surveillance and emergency response is more likely to be done, and I'll give you an example. A few years ago in the States, we had a terrible hurricane called Hurricane Katrina. And unfortunately, FEMA was overwhelmed. FEMA is like the emergency response division of the United States government that's supposed to send help and aid, water, food, etc. It is much easier to get a swarm of drones to drop those things to those people than try to get through flooded streets with people on the ground. Now, they did use helicopters, but again, that is very limited, very expensive, and this is much easier to coordinate. So I would expect to see that as a regular thing right around 2035. There's also a study that was done last year, just kind of what is the reality of using this? It's a nice white paper and pretty much just talked about how limited the battery life is, and that's always going to be a concern. When I fly, I never fly more than 50% of the battery. Why is that? Because I need to fly it back. And if that wind is facing a different direction than it was when I flew out, that could be dead in the water. But of course, susceptibility to cyber attacks is a big deal right now for this too. It's a computer, just like anything else. I remember when I first got into IoT stuff, everybody was very concerned about Alexa. And I can tell you that we're not done with this particular area. Everything is susceptible to a certain degree. It's just something that needs to be considered. Maybe there'll be a certification process to know that the drone manufacturer has done what they can do to make sure it's not susceptible, but there's always going to be the brute force approach. And of course, this white paper also looked at the future trends that talk about how machine learning can edit what it's seeing, specifically around weather patterns, right? So weather patterns might be something that the drone would need to maneuver away from so it doesn't get caught in a downpour, in the rain. Or maybe the whole purpose of that drone is to go towards like a snowstorm or a drift, etc. Now, the monitoring of renewable energy sources is a really, really big area. I would say this is almost, besides military, one of the biggest investment areas for drones is monitoring ability. And I'll show you a couple of videos that I think are super cool about that. Specifically in the UK, they're trying to approach this for your power grid because the maintenance costs are so high, they're just kind of passing all of that on to y'all. And it's difficult because it's also very dangerous, depending on the situation, for a human to go out there and assess the situation.
National Grid's electricity transmission network across England and Wales comprises 7,200 kilometres of overhead lines and 22,000 steel towers. This grid is the backbone of modern life, and as we reduce reliance on fossil fuels, it will only become more critical. As such, these assets need to be inspected regularly. Today, inspections are primarily carried out by helicopter, rope access, and locally piloted drones capturing high-resolution images. These images are reviewed by humans, supported by machine learning algorithms. Now, National Grid is working with Seize AI to trial a new data capture tool that is optimized for machine learning. This unique system enables autonomous drones to be flown by a remote operator beyond visual line of sight, leveraging similar technology to autonomous cars, but miniaturized to be carried by a small drone. This system enables consistent and repeatable capture of high-res 2D imagery at component level, geotagged into a 3D digital twin. In the future, it's inevitable that the vast majority of aerial data capture for industry and infrastructure will be carried out by autonomous systems like this one. And these latest National Grid trials are an exciting step along the journey.
Here is
5 things you need to know about
another
UAS.
thing that's autonomous
First things
that's
first,
coming out.
we have a weather station and a rain sensor built into the dock. This lets the remote pilot know if it's safe to take off. We can connect the remote controller to the dock for on-site debugging and maintenance. After landing, the driving rods are able to center the aircraft in the middle of the platform and allows the charging terminals to connect. The M30T dock version has 4 different sensors built into one payload: a laser rangefinder, optical zoom, a 640 by 512 thermal camera, and a wide sensor. When the dock closes, the motors will slowly spin so the cover itself catches the propellers and encloses them within the dock.
And that too can be yours for the low price of $29,000. But that is the way that a lot of the remote power stations out in the Himalayas are being monitored now. This thing can fly through everything. They actually did tests on it in gale force wind, blizzards, everything, and it's completely gets to put itself back to sleep at the end and recharge. Pretty cool. So digital twin is a really big place where AI is also merging a little bit with this. This will kind of allow you to more easily understand what you're seeing in real time. The benefit here is also going to be the difference that what you see on Google Maps and what you're seeing right now. This specifically is starting to be used more during construction. So they'll do the initial framing of a building and do a digital twin of it and kind of see if there's anything that they would need to fix without even going on site. It also allows you to update and do this autonomously, and it's just a little bit safer way to go in a large area. And even though that DJI drone was quite expensive, it's still less expensive than sending a crew out every day.
This video was taken near the eye of a Category 4 hurricane in the middle of the Atlantic, with waves as high as a 4-story building and winds reaching 94 miles an hour. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is sending 3 state-of-the-art drones, each with its own important mission, straight into the center of these monster storms.
The drones are a new piece of technology that is helping us uncover information about the storms that we didn't know before.
Let's take a look inside NOAA's lab to see how the agency uses drones to dive, sail, and fly into parts of a hurricane where humans could never go. At the laboratory, a team of NOAA engineers work on this torpedo-shaped drone called a glider. It's 5 feet long, can weigh up to 150 pounds, and it's controlled by drone pilots like Yuli Rivero.
A glider could cost anywhere from $175,000 to $200,000, depending on what sensors they're equipped with.
Those sensors are used to track storms half a mile beneath the ocean surface, measuring water temperatures along the way.
Beautiful. This is not a handle. This is where you have the conductivity, depth, and temperature sensor in here, and this is the dissolved oxygen.
The unit can find the warmest sections of water, which can intensify hurricanes.
Normally we dive to 900 meters, and it takes about 4 hours. So it's about 6 dives per day.
The drones collect data underwater and send it to computers like this using satellite radio waves.
So one of the things we want to know is when the glider goes into the water, if you look here, this is the actual track of what the glider did, and you see this is like almost a perfect V shape, which is what we strive for.
When the drones surface after each dive, they transmit their location to Yuli's computer, which shows up as those little dots between the lines.
So here is a map of where our gliders are right now. So we have gliders south of Puerto Rico, these 3 gliders right here, one south of the Dominican Republic, and one north of Puerto Rico.
While gliders...
What they're talking about is using LiDAR. Very cool. Did you know you can fly a drone underwater? Pilot a drone underwater. There's also sailboat drones as well. So there's lots of different kinds of vehicles. They're not just going to be flying. Some of them can fly and then dive too, which I think is super cool. The amount of data that they're getting that's much more accurate for hurricane prediction now is amazing because they're able to fly this in and not have to worry about an entire ship or sending up a big plane full of human beings. On top of that, there's different ways of powering these things that are starting to come out now. Did you know you can remotely charge a drone with a laser transmitter? Now, it's not the kind of laser that beams you're not supposed to shoot at an aircraft, by the way. Different kind of laser. But battery swapping is the biggest issue when you're on a mission. If your mission is to try and capture sunset or try to go out and do search and rescue, battery swapping is the last thing that you want to do. So there's lots of investment going into different charging techniques on the go. And this is zipline.
Over the last 7 years, we've expanded dramatically, and we now operate in 8 countries. We serve 3,400 hospitals and health facilities globally, and we'll be serving 10,000 by the end of this year. The aircraft is a vertical takeoff and landing hybrid. And then we use something called the droid that enables us to silently and very, very gently place packages at 99% of homes with dinner plate level accuracy. So that means we can deliver onto your front doorstep, onto table in your backyard.
So this is the droid that comes down from the zip. So if you have a larger space to deliver to and 50 miles away, platform 1 is going to be the right way to do that. Platform 2 is going to be the right way to make deliveries in denser settings. And then it's as simple as wrapping up the package like they would normally for any delivery, whether that's a lab medical test, a home delivery of prescription, a food delivery to someone's home, loading it into the droid through the loading portal, closing it, scanning both, and then sending it off to be delivered to the customer.
We can typically guarantee, it's 7 times faster than an instant delivery via a traditional service you might buy from today, whether you're ordering food or ordering something online. It's much faster, it's zero emission, and it's way more reliable. The reality is, the vast majority of packages, on the order of 80-85% of packages in e-commerce are 5 pounds or less.
And of course, they just got approval last fall to go ahead and do deliveries. So they're already happening in my neighborhood. It's kind of cool. I should definitely do a video for you. Which brings me to this guy. This is apparently, as of this year, the world's fastest multi-rotor unmanned aerial system. This is the Huntress 2 from Wave Aerospace. And it's a little bit of a hybrid between electric and turbo engine. So it can go really far. It can go about 30 kilometers, which is insane, just on its own power at a pretty crazy speed. So it can also carry a pretty big payload. That's a decent amount when you say like 50 kilograms is a lot. But what I found the most impressive was the fact that it can go to Mach 0.4. Nuts. Nuts. I've never seen anything do that. And based on its size, it's just a very strongly built aircraft with a lot of thrust behind it. Now, because I'm in London, I wanted to spotlight a drone manufacturer you all have here in Surrey. This is called the Sky Mantis. And it's from a manufacturer called Evolve Dynamics. What I like about this particular drone is, yes, it's used for surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance, all that jazz, also search and rescue, is the fact that they have a separate unit that can power this thing for up to 48 hours of continuous flight, because it has a tether directly to it that can also remotely detach. Pretty crazy. And it can come and just hover and attach and basically charge while it's still moving, which is crazy. Wouldn't go super far because you have that tether, but that's pretty neat. So I wanted to share that with you all and really just give you a kind of a look into where we're going in the industry in general, because there are definitely pros and cons of these guys. But there's a lot of really good things also happening out there. Beyond what we're seeing in the military use of drones, we're also seeing really positive use of drones. We've been able to do more search and rescue operations now than ever before, and a lot of work around the fire prevention industry too. As drones become larger, when applicable, they can also just do continuous streams of water into wildfires, etc. So anywhere where it's a little dangerous for a human, we've used robots. You know, you see them in the movies, that they're the ones who go into a building for you. These are just flying computers that can have various degrees of intelligence depending. This guy is pretty amazing for its 249 grams, but it's nothing compared to what you can do with the larger stuff. And as somebody who's interested in tech, I would say they're going to need a lot of software engineers. This is an industry that if you enjoy kind of working with hardware itself, might be something to consider, because lots of different industries are starting to hire to specifically develop applications for drones. So my conclusion is that it's actually a really exciting time to be here, because it's going to be safer once we have remote ID implemented in most places in the world to be able to build stuff and get the runway to do that. Because drones are here to stay is pretty much what the message is from me. And if you're interested in learning more about them, just talk to me after or hit me up on Twitter. Thank you very much.